Hey, Retcon Raider here. Goodness, 2020 already. I'm honestly not sure what to think about that. I know I've said it before, but it is increasingly difficult to believe that I've been at this for almost 3 years now. And yet, here we are. According to my notes, it has actually been over 31 months since I first started the channel. And in that time, I've uploaded almost 600 videos. I'm not sure just how many hours that all breaks down to, but God help anyone who decides to sit down and listen to my yammering for 595 videos in a row. So, with all that behind us, what do we have planned for the new year? Well, let's take a look at the basic numbers first, and then I've actually got some polls and stuff that we can talk about too. That should hopefully give you some context about what I've got in mind. Now, looking at the analytics, it looks like November was actually a slightly slower month than October. We brought in a respectable 558 new subscribers, about 2/3 of what we got back in October, but we more or less held steady on views, clocking in at roughly 162,000 global views throughout the month of November. Overall, that's actually pretty solid. Between games like Phoenix Point and Wasteland 3, not to mention Stygian and Disco Elysium, we've been seeing a slight uptick in overall traffic, but it ebbs and flows surrounding the announcements and release dates for each of those projects. As the hype rises, so do the numbers. And then, once the game actually hits launch, the hype begins to disperse, and the numbers begin to normalize. Back in November, for example, it's obvious that hype was at an all-time high for Phoenix Point, which finally hit launch in early December. While it didn't quite reach the same height as the hype surrounding games like Pathfinder Kingmaker, it was still a pretty significant boost over our usual numbers. It basically dominated the performance chart for the month, crowding games like Stygian and Disco Elysium completely off the top 10 chart for November. In fact, if it weren't for Wasteland 3 getting a sudden bump in interest, thanks to the brand new trailer revealed at XO19, I'm not sure anything would have been able to rival the interest levels I was seeing for Phoenix Point's impending launch. That actually matches the numbers I saw in the recent interest poll that I ran over on Patreon. I've run a few similar polls in the past, but usually just during slower months, or as one of my longer-running series was coming to an end and I needed a replacement. This time, though, I deliberately ran it during a busier month, so I could not just see what people thought about potential future projects, but also about my current projects, such as Phoenix Point, Stygian, and even the tragically short-lived Disco Elysium. Now, obviously, I went into this with a pretty good idea of what the results would be. I mean, I do monitor the analytics on a monthly basis. Still, I will admit, there were actually a few surprises in there. After all, the analytics only really tend to focus on my current video series, not the older ones that I've got paused. They also don't really help when it comes to gauging interest in potential new series, such as Empire of Sin, Wildermyth, or Xenonauts 2. That said, the overall response was somewhat predictable, with games like Phoenix Point and Wasteland 3 standing head and shoulders over pretty much everything else on the list. But slightly more surprising, however, was the fact that Xenonauts 2 actually ended up securing the 3rd place slot, despite the fact that I've never actually made any videos about it. Similarly, there's some modest interest in Necromunda, which is due for a beta launch early next year, and it turns out there's still some pretty decent interest in games like Darkest Dungeon and Battletech as well. In the case of Darkest Dungeon, there's a fair amount of folks who'd love to see me resume the old narrative series, while in the case of Battletech, it's actually the exact opposite. Apparently, folks do want to see me play more Battletech, but they'd rather see me start a completely new series for that one, with all the DLC included. There's obviously a decent amount of interest in games like Battle Brothers, Pathfinder Kingmaker, and even Fallout Van Buren. But for now, I think it's safe to say that most of them will just stay on the back burner. With that in mind, I will keep listing them in future polls, and eventually they might start working their way towards the top of the list. In the meantime, though, I'll keep them paused, but I might see about throwing together an occasional episode or two, just to help tide people over. After all, those are all projects that I genuinely do want to finish. I just can't justify dedicating too much time to them right now, not while I've got bigger things on my plate. As for games like Stygian and Disco Elysium, well, the outlook for those projects is a little more bleak. Unfortunately, those were two of the lowest ranking projects on my November interest poll, and that actually does more or less match what I was seeing in the monthly analytics. Although I do love playing those text-heavy narrative games, they just seem to have a much harder time hooking and holding viewer interest. They also take a lot more work to record and edit, and all that talking can end up being pretty hard on my throat. As much as I hate to say it, those sorts of projects might be better suited to one-shots or short-run limited series. It's actually pretty interesting, considering that games like Kingmaker are also pretty heavy on text-based content. In that case, though, I think it helps that Kingmaker has a lot more action and exploration to help break up the potential monotony of all the story and text-based interaction. There's a little bit of something for everyone, so even if someone doesn't care about character X or plot point Y, they can always skip ahead to the next big dungeon crawl. Anyway, it is what it is, and while I'm not quite ready to just cancel either series outright, I'll definitely have to keep that option open. For now, I'll just keep listing them on the monthly polls, and wait to see if the interest levels ever end up spiking. If they consistently stay near the bottom of the list, though, then eventually I will end up having to cut them loose. Don't get me wrong, I do love those games, but let's be honest here. There's not much point in making videos about games that only appeal to a small fraction of my audience. As always, I've only got a limited amount of time that I can spend working on these projects in the first place. It only makes sense to keep myself focused on the ones that the majority of my audience would like to see. Regardless, like I said, I'm certainly not going to make these sorts of decisions based on the results of a single poll. I'm actually hoping to start running similar polls on a semi-regular basis, just so I can get a better overall feel for how my audience's interest levels change over time. In fact, I've already got a new poll running over on my Patreon while I'm recording this video, and I can already see at least some of the numbers are starting to shift. For now though, I think it's pretty safe to say that Phoenix Point is here to stay, at least for the time being. While the overall engagement levels on the series did start declining throughout December, interest levels actually seem to have been growing amongst my core audience. That means that I'll continue treating it as my primary series as we head into January, but I'll see about supplementing it with a few side projects as well. I'm not sure what just yet, but maybe some overviews or lore analysis videos, maybe even a new episode or two for some of my other series. I guess we'll just have to wait and see, though, like I said, those new polls will be influencing my decisions. As for games like Wasteland 3, Xenonauts 2, and Necromunda, well, those are a little harder to plan around. We know that all of them are supposed to be hitting early access sometime in the first quarter of 2020, but there's no actual hard date attached just yet. Which, of course, means that I'll have to keep my production schedule relatively flexible, just in case. We might see them sometime in January or as late as March. Later, if they end up getting delayed. And when they do come out, I'll probably end up dropping everything else, so I can give them my undivided attention, at least for a week or two. After that, well, I'll go back to whatever I was doing before, and we'll let the monthly polls decide whether or not I should give it more of my time. Anyway, I suppose that's about it for now, so let's go ahead and start winding things down. As always, I'd like to close things out by giving thanks to you, the viewers, the folks who keep encouraging me to make more videos, even when I'm starting to feel a little burned out or getting a little too frustrated with one of my current projects. I mean, heck, I've said it before, but it always bears repeating. It's thanks to folks like you that I'm still doing this stuff in the first place. Especially to the Raiders, the fine folks who help support the channel financially on a month-to-month basis. In fact, it's thanks to them that I recently finished my biggest upgrade yet, a fancy new computer and recording rig, which I've been using to make my new ongoing Phoenix Point series. Now, I won't bore you with the details, at least not here, but you can always go check out the special video I uploaded about it earlier this month. I'll include a couple of links in the comments below. Regardless, special thanks to my honorary Raiders for November: Austin Fagan, Bedritsky Alexander, Benjamin Gray, BioGolem, Brad Quinn, Cecil Kane, CRXCRVS, Doman Anslovar, ICU Uwu, Kim S. Jensen, Mike Zitter, Mark Richards, Maximilian Monk, Mozzie Melton, Mr. Scar Lectures, Naum Asenarov, Rob H., Tom Edward Idland, and Yokes. And extra special thanks to my veteran Raiders for November: A Normal Joe, AdriRaven, Alois, Ash, Ben Hollingshead, Drakiith, Eoftar, Exsellsior, Forbidden One, James Trimmier, Laura and Mike, Leroy Nukenson, Matthew Holmquist, Mildly Nuclear, Nod Goblin Nico, Per-Ingemar Andersson, Sir Skelibate, The Cursed Typewriter, and Woe77. Oh, and special mention to my two Raider captains, Mike Spark and Valinrook, who you may know from my recent Phoenix Point series, as well as Revenant, my one and only Raider Lord. In fact, as if being a Raider Lord wasn't already crazy enough, Revenant is the mad genius behind the recent video about my new computer. At any rate, if you'd like to help support the channel financially, then feel free to check out the links to my PayPal or Patreon accounts in the description below. Donations go towards helping cover the channel's overhead, the cost of upgrades, and towards keeping both me and my cats properly fed. And in return, you can get access to things like my super secret Patreon updates, my new monthly content polls, preferential placement on my waiting lists, and even occasional early access to many videos that I happen to finish ahead of schedule. You'll also have my eternal gratitude for that extra little bit of financial support, which I suppose isn't much of a perk, but look, I'll still be grateful whether you like it or not. Anyway, as usual, I think that's just about enough begging for 1 month, so let's just wrap things up, shall we? This is Retcon Raider, signing off. Thanks for listening. And, I guess I'll see you next year. Oh, and remember, if you need to contact me for any reason, just leave a comment on any of my videos. Or you can reach me directly through my Facebook page, my Patreon account, my Twitter feed, or my official email address. As always, links are in the description.